Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to this episode, which is a cross-listed episode on Jonas's SublimMedia and my 10-minute record reviews. And just a little bit of a story about this special episode, and that is that we, of course, are both members of the vinyl community, and for better or worse, we collect a lot of records, each of us, and so far our personal relationships have survived that odyssey. And we've got to know each other because our tastes are similar and we appreciate each other's videos, and we began to explore each other's collections, as one does, and finding a lot of commonality. And so it struck us it might be kind of fun to pick a few records and work through our views of those records and see what comes out of that. And this may be tremendously successful. There may be a clamor for more of this, or this may be a one-off. But in any event, we're glad you're along for the ride, and we would love it if you would also add your comments about the records in the comments below. Jonas, would you have anything to add to that?
No, I'm from Sweden. I want to say that. So my English is not as good as Alan's, but I hope you endure either way. So yeah, this is the second time I think I'm doing a live thing. Otherwise, I just edit all my videos so that you don't have to live with all the air and ahs and stuff like that. So yeah, that's the only thing I want to add.
Yeah, comes to the territory. And I'm from Canada, so my English is also compromised. But
okay.
hopefully everybody will be able to get past that. So we picked 10 records. We'll reveal them one after the other. As I said, one of us is going to talk about the record, and the other person is then going to either praise those comments or shoot them down in flames or something like that. But we should have some fun. So Jonas, you want to start with our first record?
Yeah, the first record I'm going to show is this one. We took a look at our collections and saw that we had a huge bunch of common records, and this is one that we have both of us had in our collection. This is Nashville Skyline with Bob Dylan. I think it was released 1969, and I don't know, I've had this for so long. I have a lot of Bob Dylan records, and back in the day when I bought this 10, 12, 13 years ago, something like that, you could find Bob Dylan records for next to nothing, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 euros or something like that. Very inexpensive artist back in the day, because everyone bought it. Nashville Skyline, it's actually one of my favorite Bob Dylan records because it's so different. He wanted to do his sort of country thing. He had listened to Johnny Cash a lot, and you can hear he's doing his voice almost like a Cash sort of thing, and it bleeds over to A New Morning, I think, also, and some great well-known tracks. A Girl from the North Country, obviously, that he does with Johnny Cash. Do you know, Alan, which record that was on the first? Was it?
I can't. Quite remember. I'm not sure.
Remember. And I also have To Be Alone With You, I Throw It All Away, fantastic on Lay Lady Lay, one of the best ones that he ever did. Yeah, so everyone was 1969. Everyone was going to Woodstock and doing their sort of thing, and I guess that a lot of people thought that Bob Dylan would do Woodstock also. I mean, this sort of the voice of a generation, really. If anyone would do Woodstock, it would be Dylan, and he did like the absolute opposite. He went to Nashville and recorded a country record. Yeah. And I love him for that. So any opinions of that?
Well, I mean, first of all, I agree with you about the voice, and really the surprising thing, and you can imagine how shocking it would have been for everybody who is used to, I mean, you would never, people will disagree on this, but I would never put Dylan in the great voices of our time. He's got a characterful voice, and a voice that we associate with so much great music that he's written, but it's not necessarily a classically beautiful voice. But we had all gotten used to, or not that I was listening to music a lot in those days, but people who were listening to folk music had gotten used to that higher, more nasal kind of a voice. And then here he comes, he's dropped his voice basically a whole octave. And that has got to be shocking. Was it as shocking as when he went electric in 65, 66? You know, I don't know, but it was certainly, once again, like you said about Woodstock, he's swimming upstream here. For me, like the production on this is superb. And part of that is because he's gone down to Nashville. He's working partly with Cash's band on certainly the opening track, but mostly with a whole bunch of so-called Nashville A-teamers. And by the way, if anyone's interested in that whole world, listen to Cocaine and Rhinestones, that podcast. Well, there's a whole session on the Nashville A-team, which is fantastic. Just to plug for that guy. But the sound of this record, I think, compared to some of the production of his earlier stuff too, particularly the mid 60s electric stuff, which I always think sounds a bit muddy, this sounds just beautiful to my ears. With the one exception, I will say, of the Johnny Cash song, which to me sounds kind of sloppy. Like, how many takes do they only do? One take of this, or what? I'm not sure, but I just feel the rest of the record just sounds much better than that particular track, which is a classic, right? Because of the duo there. But maybe they could have done a few more takes. I sort of feel. Anyway, so those are my thoughts. But yeah, amazing record, eh? Amazing record. Had a whole new era for him. And I will say, I think the lyrics to Lay Lady Lay are a bit cheesy, but otherwise, I think it's brilliant. So
he has some lyric lines in his sort of backpack, so it's okay for one to be
yeah, exactly. He'd established his credibility as a lyricist. Let's just say he's got a Nobel Prize to prove it. Okay, our next record that we're going to talk about is this one, which is Fela Kuti playing live in the Abbey Road Studios in 1971. I think it's with Ginger Baker. Ginger Baker is in this group, but he's one of 7 different percussionists who are playing. So this is basically Fela Kuti's band playing live in Abbey Road Studios. They actually brought about 100 and some people into the studio to listen in, and apparently it was just, everyone was smoking up, and it's just a big cloud of smoke, and it was a whole vibe, and they had sort of colored lights and the whole deal. And Kuti had actually been there to or maybe Fela is how he's more properly referred to, was actually there with his band the day before making another record. And then they say, well, let's come back and do it live and let's get Ginger in. So Ginger shows up with this massive drum kit that's like as big as Fela's whole band, right? And then they get into it. I think this is amazing African funk. There's clearly it's a fusiony piece, right? Because it's you can hear Nigeria, right? But you and West Africa in general, but you can also hear, I don't even know if Fela's from Nigeria, but you can hear West Africa very clearly. But you can also hear James Brown. You can hear Stax Records. That whole sound is in there as well. Apparently, there's a documentary too about Ginger Baker and Fela Kuti traveling through Africa, discovering rhythms, which is kind of where I guess they did that before or after, but part of their relationship. Anyway, but I love this record. I think it's got an incredible groove. I think it sounds fantastic, and it's just I wouldn't necessarily pick out the individual tracks. It's just the overall vibe all the way through. It's just a fun record.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's this one, isn't it?
That's the one.
Fun that we have different covers. What's your what pressing do you?
Oh, this is a French pressing. It sounds like a coffee.
It's like US pressing. So you have the European, and I have the US. That's pretty.
Yeah,
pretty cool.
Kind of funny.
I love this record. I mean, and this is unfortunately the only record I have with Fela Kuti. I have a lot of Ginger Baker stuff, so that's why I have this. And I actually have it filed on the Baker and not Fela Kuti. And Fela Kuti is one of those sort of artists that I really need to. We're going to talk about another artist that it's the same thing, but I really need to really dive into his catalog, but he has released so much, so this is really easy to take a grip on compared to the other stuff. I don't know where to begin, so maybe you send me a guide or something like that.
Yeah, it's well, he's I will say too that's for me the next big challenge is West African music, which I'm getting more and more into. But then you learn a little bit of something, and then you realize how little you know, right? And then it's a whole phase of for me anyway, listening and reading and listening and thinking and then eventually you find your way to the stuff you really like. Because I truly believe in any style of music, doesn't matter what it is. Well, I don't know, maybe not jungle for me, but in almost any style of music, there's something in there that I think is going to think is great. Maybe not everything, but a core of that. So, okay, do you want to talk about our next record then?
We also saw that we had this in common. One of the I mean, the all-time greats, isn't it? The Black Sabbath's debut album on Vertical Records. This is a German first press with, and I mean, when this was released, I wasn't there when this was released, obviously. But when it was released, this had to be mind-blowingly good, or different at least. And I think that when it comes to Sabbath, for me, it's maybe the first 4 or 5 records, and I don't think that Ozzy Osbourne's solo stuff that he did later on, I don't listen to it. I did back in the day, but I don't do it anymore. So yeah, and this label, obviously, if you've seen my channel, this is the one of the labels that I collect. Unfortunately, I'm not alone collecting this label, so
that's the problem. Yeah,
that's the problem. Exactly. Yeah, but I don't know. It's a classic record, and one of my all-time favorites, really.
Yeah,
do you have any thoughts about it?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I actually don't have this is actually a very recent reissue, which I'm of two minds about. It's one of the kind of Rhino reissues from, I think, 2018 or somewhere around there. Yeah, so when I first heard this, I mean, I'm always struck. I reviewed this record on my channel, but I'm always struck with that first track, right? First of all, it's a part of a very limited number of records which have the band name is also the name of the album, is also the name of the song. Bad Company also pulled this off. There's a couple of bands do this as well. But that first song, to me, so much could go wrong, right? We're going to do this like spooky song about Satan and all the rest of it, and yet what I love about it is they play it straight. And I know they play it straight because when I was a kid, when I first heard this song, I was like 12 or 13, sitting alone at night listening to this in my headphones. Like, it's scary. It was a scary song to listen to, at that age, and maybe not so much these days. But I think they had found a sound that nobody else had found, and there are other records we'll talk about later on. In the later '60s, people are struggling towards finding a heavy rock sound, but partly because of just the imagination hadn't got there, partly because of production techniques. The sound wasn't that heavy. Like Cream was trying it, Hendrix was trying it. Vanilla Fudge was trying it, Iron Butterfly, but it was all still a little bit tinny, a little bit thin, and it wasn't until 69 or 68, 69 that boom, like the dam breaks open, and this record really puts a seal on it. And they kind of ran out of, they had basically 2/3 of an album here when they came to the studio, and so there's a lot of jams, which I think people are fond of. I'm fond of them, but they could have maybe put another couple of decent tracks in there, as opposed to like sort of Tony sitting there thinking, okay, what am I going to play next, right, kind of thing, which the feeling you get at times. But
the Paranoid record it's maybe a more solid sort of record than the debut, but I still think that the debut, with all the sort of almost mysticism and it's such an iconic piece of record. So I think that I hail that a little bit higher than any other in the catalog. And it's fun that you say that, because it's not long ago that I discovered that the production of the record is pretty good. I mean, I've always had this in my mind that it's a garage sort of gritty sounding production and record, but that's the complete opposite. It's really good.
Things they did with Roger Bain were absolutely great, and the production, as they descend into sort of cocaine-fueled nightmares in the latter part of the 70s, right? The production, I mean, their last couple of albums sound like they're recorded in like an aluminum shack somewhere, right? With the heat turned up too high. But no, the production's really, really great here. There's some different track listings on this record too. But maybe not to get too mired in that now, but we may actually have different track listings on this, because anyway, different versions have different listings. Anyway, so changing gears. Now let's talk about something which was not an artist's first record, but probably about their 30th or 40th, but stands out a bit in their catalog, and that is John Coltrane's album, posthumously released, recorded actually in 1965. Which is Om. And this is an interesting record. It is, well, there's a lot of stories about it. First of all, it's interesting it's made in 65 because his work doesn't really get out there until 66, 67. This is recorded not too long in terms of a number of months after Love Supreme. But it is also a point at which you can just hear the different things happening in the band, pulling it apart, because the original quartet, actually, amazingly enough, all still play on this, along with Fela and a few other people, right? And so it's transitional. And so you can hear at points, there's clearly Coltrane and Fela are just ripping and just doing the things that they were doing at the time. Then, there's Elvin trying to swing, right? And there's McCoy trying to add some musicality into it, particularly the latter part of side one. And Elvin would be gone in 2 or 3 months. And I think the thing he said was at a certain point, all I could hear was noise. And that's basically, I think what he can hear here. I love the chanting. Apparently they did acid. This was recorded in Seattle, and it was done just, there's that recording live in Seattle. It's either the day before or day after that. And apparently they dropped acid to make this. And I also gather Coltrane was kind of embarrassed and didn't want to release it, but I'm glad they did, because even though there's some weird stuff on here, it's fascinating because there's so many different threads, I think.
Yeah, I was super glad that you picked this record, and I mean the gatefold, inside the gatefold you have the Love Supreme photo also. So it's drenched with I Love Supreme, in my opinion, and I understand why Coltrane didn't want to release it, because in his sort of what's the word for it? It's a selection of records. It wasn't a solid sort of record, but then again, for us now, long after he's gone, and being able to listen to this in chronological order through the discography, it's just fantastic, because you can say, as you said, he's really like ripping off and taking off from the traditional quartet that he was playing with, going to another dimension, like really going towards something completely different. And after this, well, we know what happened. A lot of great free jazz records.
Yeah, that's right. And so it's a really it's just an interesting moment. Okay, so now Jonas, over to you for our next one.
This is also one that we have in common in our collection, In a Mountain Flame, with Mahavish Orchestra, their debut record from 1970?
Something like
71?
that.
Around that time. 72. My press is from 72 at least. One of my favorite records of all time. I love this record. And one of my best friends, he, back in the day, because he's a little bit older than I am, back in the day when this was released, he bought it. It changed his life forever. And so I have a lot of like nostalgia to this also. But it's also one of my entry points into jazz, I think, starting somewhere here. So that's my take on it. I think that in my opinion, there's not a bad song on this, but there are super good songs, like Meeting of the Spirits, the first song on side one, and The Dance of Maya, also one of those sort of classic fusion tracks. And all of the players are playing their heart out. I mean, Billy Cobham is playing like crazy. And even if this is a fantastic record, I think that Birds of Fire is the one that they're really that's my favorite with Mahavish Orchestra. One Word is they could play One Word, that song, on my funeral if they wanted to. But
that's high praise. Yeah.
Well, so what's your take on?
It's funny, all the songs, I picked out a number of songs that I think are the great songs on this record, and none of them were the songs that you talked about. They're actually actually different ones. The tracks that I love on here are Lotus, what's got a longer title, Lotus in the Irish Stream, Dawn, Noonward. So a little, some of the mellower tracks, right? And first of all, I think where we could both agree is that the musicianship on this is incredible, right? I mean, this is I mean, in some respects, it's, you know, it's a lot of times people say, you know, jazz is musicians' music. This is one of those records that kind of is that. This is not for the popular market. This is for, you know, people who truly can appreciate technical playing. But the kinds of playing that we like sometimes differ. Like I love, so we, you know, we're talking about this before we actually went on the air here, but I like, when it comes to fusion kind of goes two ways. Part of it is towards kind of very classically trained and neoclassically or classically inspired, highly technical music, often guitarists like Pat Metheny and McLaughlin, people like that, kind of gone that way. Or there's also fusion which moves more towards the R&B, soul, funk side of things, right? A lot of the stuff that comes out on Kuti, CTI, that sort of, you know, which is my preference. I find the former stuff, which is kind of my problem with some prog as well. And I know you're a huge prog fan, right? So I know this is a place where we diverge. I find a lot of the guitar stuff on here, I kind of put in the category of noodling. Like it's too manic. It's like Mozart, you know, too many notes, kind of, not that I dislike Mozart, but, you know, just the quote from the movie, too many notes. So there's places where it just gets a bit manic for me. I find, and I would just say that it doesn't swing, right? At times, despite the fact that Billy Cobham is incredible, but in other parts of this record, it totally swings, like Dawn, Noonward, like those are just beautiful, beautiful tracks. So I listen to this and I go, oh, I can't listen to this next track. I'm like, oh, this is incredible. Oh, I can't listen. Oh, this is incredible. And I'm sort of up and down all the way through. But I try to take my own opinion out just as a piece of music. It's clearly an incredible piece of music. What I'm just talking about is my own taste, really, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. And you should, I mean, we should always start with our own taste when it comes to reviewing and talking about records. I think that with John McLaughlin, I came from when I discovered this sort of music, I was deep into guitars, but it was more of the sort of metal and more technical metal side maybe of music. So when I heard this for the first time and realizing it was from 1972, I had never heard anyone play like this. And it's like you say, it's noodling. There's so many notes that one can fit in in a song. It's incredible. But I think that I was drawn into the sort of guitar style and guitar sound maybe. And when we venture out, I mean, Billy Cobham's first solo, I can't remember what it's called, but it sounds, I mean, all these players, Rick Ladd, John Hammond, and Jerry Goodman, they did their stuff, didn't they?
Yeah.
So it feels like the sort of the ground structure of this sort of fusion, and there were a lot of fusion coming, this sort of fusion coming after this, over the entire world, I think, not only in UK and in the US.
Classic cover too. Love that cover.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
great one.
Okay, well, so now let's move on. And that whole discussion makes me think we should at some point do another video just on Yngwie Malmsteen and Steve Vai. But
we can do that. Could probably do an hour on Yngwie.
Oh my God, exactly. So the next record, a bit of a different one. I have one which is well loved, and someone spilled some hot chocolate on it, which is Joni Mitchell's, or I hope it's hot chocolate. Could be worse. Joni Mitchell's Court and Spark. Now, again, we were chatting about this before, but putting this on, I'd forgotten how good this record was. And I've spent a lot of time in recent years listening to what is probably critically the favorite record, you know, in terms of the critics' consensus, which is Blue. And I've spent a lot of time listening to that and some of our other stuff too. And I had only really spun this once or twice. And then I went back and listened to it just as we were preparing, and it's amazingly good. I didn't realize actually it was her bestseller too, which is something I found out. What I think I love about this record is the depth of her voice. She, in her first few records, she's doing this sort of songbird thing. She's going way up there, which is great, but sometimes it's jarring is a wrong word, but sometimes it's just a little much. And here her voice is, these are mellower songs in some respect. Her voice is lower through a lot of the record. And that I just found, really appealing. And also, funnily enough, I'm normally, anybody who watches my channel would know, normally a fan of less instrumentation and less heavy duty slick production. But this is an exception. Like, she's got a big full band and lots of studio players, a bunch of guest art like David Crosby, other guest artists on here. And I think this sounds great. I think this may be her best sounding record, just as something to pop the needle on, just in terms of the quality and the feeling of the sound and the big bottom end, all the rest of it. So yeah, love it. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you. I listened to this today also just to refresh my memory, and it's a fantastic record. And it reminds me to really listen more to Joni than I have. I have maybe, I don't know, five records or something with her. But as you said, I always put on Blue when I'm in the mood for Joni. The only sort of criticism I have against her, but I don't think it's her. It's more to me is that if I listen to 1, 2 tracks, 3 tracks, not something like that, I think it gets a little bit repetitive. Like, okay, so her voice is fantastic, but it's just the same all the way through.
Yeah, it's hard to listen to a couple of hours of her in a row. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so in my opinion. But then again, could be that I haven't listened enough to her catalog. And I know she did a record called Mingus or something like that, which is a little bit more jazzier. But I can feel the tendencies on this sort of I get a little bit of a jazz vibe on this. I don't know if I'm picking up something that I.
No, I totally agree. I mean, I think this is where, I mean, I haven't done a lot of reading about her, but just as I think of her records, this is the point at which she's kind of leaving the sort of the folk muse siren songstress thing a little bit aside and moving more. It makes me this record feels a lot more like Carole King, right? Than some of her other records, and it's got that, some of the, even though Carole King's records, early ones, were not sort of heavily produced, there's a lushness to her sound which I don't think applied to Joni's earlier stuff. But this sounds a lot more like Carole King. It gives me the same kind of same sort of soft, it's like soft rock, right? More than folk in some respects. But yeah, beautiful record. But yeah, I'm not personally, Mingus there's a record which of course is a well-known record, but I haven't actually explored yet, and that's actually kind of reminds me of my list of things to look into. So
yeah, it's a great record. I think that Jaco Pastorius, talking about the fusion guys, are playing on that. Maybe it was another one, but they collaborated on 1, 2, 3 records, something like that. I think. Great bass player. Yeah. My next one is 1967, and it's her Satanic Majesties request by the Rolling Stones. We also had this in common.
Along with the funky ass whatever that's called. I don't know what that's called. They used to come in cereal boxes. I don't know about in Sweden, but in Canada, when you were a kid, you get little things like that, little gimmicky toys. Yeah.
Yeah, we had that too. I mean, I'm brought up on cereals, sugar cereals, so I'm always happy. Like but I don't have any teeth left, so that's the downside of it. Yeah, I think that this is a masterpiece of a record. Actually, it doesn't feel like the Rolling Stones at all, and it may be my favorite Rolling Stones record. But then again, there are some to choose from. But yeah, I mean, 2000 Man, fantastic, and 2000 Light Years from Home, great. She's a Rainbow, The Lantern, fantastic song. Their psychedelic sort of Sgt. Pepper or take on Sgt. Pepper, I guess, and they failed miserably if they wanted to copy Sgt. Pepper, but they made something else, and I'm glad that they did.
Yeah.
So, opinions on this one?
Well, I think I could talk to a lot of Stones fans for days and days and days, and it'd be hard to find somebody who would say that this was their favorite Stones record. So that's a remarkable thing in and of itself.
I think it's the psych part of me that
Oh yeah, because of course, yeah, you're a big psychedelia fan, and yeah, that's right. And well, I think, you know, well, first of all, my experience with this record was I never listened to it for many years because it was so robustly panned, right? In you know, my teens, when I was sort of, you know, trying to buy records and, you know, with the limited, you know, paper route money I had or whatever, you know, I wasn't going to buy a record where I, you know, could read that everyone said, oh, this is a shitty record. So I didn't listen to it really for a long time until I was in my 20s, I think.
Okay.
I think this catches the Stones. It's not as bad as people say, but I think it's got some pretty serious problems. I think this catches the Stones at a kind of a weak moment, right? Because their first few years, they're basically a blues cover band, right? They're doing this knockoff Chess Records kind of blues stuff reasonably well, maybe better than a lot of the British bands, but there's only so much runway they had with that. But they also were, you know, and their manager, not bar though he was, you know, persuades them to do their own originals and their own poppy originals like Ruby Tuesday and stuff like that. Those do better, right? So there's a bit of a path opening that way, but then on Between the Buttons, which is the record just before this, I think that all runs out of gas. For some reason, people didn't like that record. I don't like that record. I think there's not a ton of good stuff on there. And so they're kind of, I think, drifting at this point. Brian is heading downhill, right? He's going to die fairly, you know, in the next year or two, but he's still bringing in all kinds of weird vibe and shit into the studio. And then the Summer of Love and the Beatles are happening and all this sort of stuff. And I think they get swept up in that. And this record, as you say quite rightly, is part of that. But I think these guys are great when they write songs with a real groove that are based in black music. They're not really philosophers, frankly. I'm not saying they're dumb, but I just don't think these guys are philosophers. You know, maybe more, they are more than AC/DC, but not so much. And when they really got back into their groove, like, you know, with their next album, Beggar's Banquet, right? Then they're writing that great rootsy rock, which is sort of influenced by Stax Records, and that stuff is obviously is their great era. This, I don't know. I think Tooth and Nail Man is good. I think She's a Rainbow is okay. That weird Gomper song, I think, is not too bad either. With the that's the one with the sitar, right? I think.
Yeah,
but otherwise,
I think so, yeah.
I think there's just a lot of, let's get a bunch of drugged up people in the studio and start chanting and shit. And I think it's not surprising to me that their very next record was a total change of direction. And I think that was probably just Keith just grabbing everyone by the scruff of the neck. I don't really know the story for sure, but I'm pretty sure Keith said, no, let's do some rock and roll. And
I think so too.
Happened.
Definitely. And
but,
I mean,
no, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm super glad that they took that other route because there are so many more psychedelic bands that does that sort of thing much better than the Rolling Stones. And I think that, like Exile on Main Street, which is a completely different record than her Satanics, is fantastic. So I mean, yeah, I'm glad that they changed.
But I don't think you can really understand the Stones' sort of trajectory without listening to this record, right? It takes them to a certain point and they go, oh, back up, and then they go a whole other way, right? So
yeah, and then it would be, I mean, obviously it would be interesting to see what would happen with the Stones if Brian Jones would still live and produce and keep on influencing the other members, maybe with, like the Beatles did with the Indian raga and stuff like that. Maybe the other records wouldn't become at all, or maybe he was just like kicked out and did a solo project or something. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
like Sid Barrett.
Yeah, exactly. Well, maybe. I mean, I think Brian's trajectory was only downward. I think it was his band, it wasn't his band, and I think that was just going to lead to more and more depression, but who knows? Anyway, rest in peace. Okay, so next record, we're a little bit out of sequence, but that's okay, because we can both count to 10, so it's good, I think. So is this funky ass record from 1956, which is available in all kinds of bizarre versions and pressings. I don't know which one you have. I have a very unsatisfactory pressing. God knows when it came out, but I got it relatively recently. And all of Sun Ra's records. I mean, he did. Yeah, maybe we have the same one. I don't know. The label looks the same. But they self-produced their records for, over large chunks of time, had his own label. And so it's one of those artists, I hate to say it, but one of those artists may be better to listen to on CD, just because you never know what you're going to get. To buy the original pressings is ridiculously expensive.
Yeah, you can.
But so I mean, my thought on this is like, so some jazz artists, some of them in the 50s and 60s, are totally determined to tear down all the walls surrounding music, right? Albert Ayler, right? Ultimately, John Coltrane, Archie Shepp, right? Don Cherry, Ornette Coleman, right? There's all these, and they made some amazing music. Sometimes when all the walls are torn down and they're full, and the logical conclusion of where they're going is there, sometimes that musical vision is incredibly beautiful and fantastic. I think for me, Pharoah Sanders is in that category. By the time he gets to articulating his full vision by the early 70s, I'm blown away by how beautiful that is. For other people, I think when they actually get there, and I would actually put Coltrane in this category, it's a little underwhelming because there's so little structure and definition that you're so frankly, I mean, I'm kind of in the Elvin Jones camp. At a certain point, all I'm hearing is noise, although maybe I'm more amenable to it than Elvin was, but I take the point. Yeah. So for some of these artists, I think the stops along the way are more interesting than where they eventually get. And so this record, so where Sun Ra goes, and there's a whole bunch of different phases, and I wouldn't claim to be an expert on his music at all, but he goes to different places later in his career, which are wildly different. Some are hugely unstructured, and even though those records are very hard to find and very expensive, if you do lay your hands on them, some of that music is just pretty chaotic, and I have to say I'm not that keen on it. This, I find, is kind of in that sweet spot because it comes out in 56. So in the context of the other stuff, all the hard bop that was ruling the airwaves in 1956, this is some trippy shit on here. And it's totally eclectic. There's like swing, there's hard bop, there's free jazz, there's like every single track is almost different. And then there's like little ambient sound bits and so on. So I think it's like a soundtrack to a Jimmy Stewart movie, only if Dennis Hopper was the star, right? And it's it's like the 50s on acid a little bit, and because it's that blend, that's what I love about this record. It's fascinating. Listening to the music, a lot of it's great. Like John Gilmore, one of the great underappreciated sax players in the history of jazz, and the trumpet player, I forget who's playing. Not mentioned. Well, hang on. Arthur Hoyle on trumpet is great too, but it's a great record, and I say just kind of in that sweet spot. What do you think about it?
Yeah, I agree totally. This is the only Sun Ra record I have, and it was recommended to me by a great friend who also did at least YouTube videos back in the day. He has a fantastic jazz collection, Insane Anders, in Stockholm. He recommended this because I asked him where to start, because it's very overwhelming when you look at his discography. Sun Ra has put out many records, many records. And so I started with this. I think it's a really, really good record, but I haven't bought anything after this because I don't know where to go. I don't know where to. It's so overwhelming. So again, and we talked about this earlier, this is one of those artists where I just need to dive headfirst into it, read as much as I can, watch every documentary there is, and listening to this artist for like 2 weeks in a row, just straight, nothing else, just Sun Ra music, to just get into it and see what if it's something for me. I'll bet it is, but until I do that, I don't think that I'll really sort of grasp the artist Sun Ra until then. I
think you can spend a lifetime trying to grasp all the different aspects of his music, because it ranges. There's some deeply funky stuff in there, particularly in the 70s. There's some totally free stuff. He's using all kinds of different instrumentation. There's a lot of experimentation for experimentation's sake as well. I mean, so he's incredibly, if you view the whole trajectory of free jazz as liberating the mind, right? I mean, he's out there at the forefront, right? But he's just, if you're somebody who's trying to organize your thoughts about what is the world of music and and how does this fit in? What do I like out of that? I mean, there's no substitute. One has to listen to a lot of his stuff, and I suspect there's nobody who likes all of it. I mean, maybe there are a few people, but it's definitely one you just got to dip in, I think. So there's a few other pieces, but anyway.
And as a collector, it's pretty daunting also to get into trying to find first pressings and stuff like that, because I mean, I would die for a Sun Ra first press early one with the sort of handmade covers and stuff like that. Yeah. It's so cool. The collector in me just, but
just the beauty of the artwork and just the eclectic nature of it, right? And this whole subculture he built, right, with the Arkestra and so on. That is endlessly fascinating to me, and I agree it'd be lovely to, but good luck finding those, right? So good
luck finding those. I just want to say also that there's a workshop held here in Sweden for children that is called Sun Ra something. So they take Sun Ra's music and make children's workshops to let their fantasy flourish and stuff like that, and teach them different instruments and stuff like that. So pretty cool. But then again, there's Sweden for you, Sun Ra kids workshop. Yeah.
Well, there you have it.
We'll just leave it at that.
I won't comment on Swedish society or culture, because that's outside the boundaries of this video. Okay, so now a couple more. So do you want to talk about Miles?
Yeah, and this, it comes as no surprise, I guess, that we had this. Both of us have a Bitches Brew by Miles Davis, 1971, I think, or is it 70? Maybe you have better knowledge about that. But I actually found Miles Davis in my life after Mahavish Orchestra. So I knew that John McLaughlin was playing on this one, and I knew about the cover artwork of all the sort of magazines that did the sort of 500 best records ever. This was also always on that one. And I think that I thought that this was better than I do today. That's like my opinion on this one. I think that when you have listened to enough Miles and also other sort of fusion stuff, this doesn't hold up as good as some other music, in my opinion. Well, but with that being said, it's a fantastic, iconic record. So yeah, I think that's my take on this. Do you have any thoughts? I have the I'll show the box set. I got this the 4th anniversary. It has a DVD with the live concert from Copenhagen 1969, and CDs with a bunch of different outtakes and stuff like that. But vinyl wise, it's just the ordinary record.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, this is a record that makes all kinds of top 10 lists, right? It's a record which people say, what should I listen to when I get into jazz? It's often also mentioned as, here's a great, marrying of the jazz tradition with sort of funky music, and Miles is once again, So I got to say, this is the record where I stopped buying what Miles is selling, right? I loved the early parts of his electric phase. I love it. I like In a Silent Way, I think, is one of the great records of all time. In fact, I think A Silent Way is no pun intended, miles better than this record. I think Bitches, and I also find it's funny that Miles gets so much credit for being, let's fuse, sort of R&B and soul rhythms, with jazz, because I don't find, first of all, this doesn't swing at all. To my ears. I also don't think it's particularly good fusion. I mean, they ran the tape for hours and hours. Teo Macero and Miles then chopped it up into chunks, and so you get these songs, but they're just basically selections from a long jam. And it doesn't groove, right? It doesn't. I give me almost any random Kuti record from the early 70s over this record. If I want to hear something that's truly sort of jazz funk fusion, like, you know, which I think is, give me anything by Dr. Lonnie Smith. You know, I much prefer that. And I also think that, you know, in terms of some of the, you know, the more, as we talked about earlier, the more noodly types of music, I think there's better examples. So I'm constantly this record occupies a place on a shelf for me, along with Pet Sounds, as records that are endlessly praised, and I have tried again and again and again and again and again with, and I just have to say, okay, this must just be about me, because other people are seeing genius here, you know. But then the more records I listen to, right, and the more time goes by, I'm just, like I say, I'm not buying it. I think this record has a lot of critical weight behind it, but I don't know how many people, you know, have well, I don't know that the fan experience is necessarily the same as you know, what the critical establishment thinks. I mean, at a certain point, people assume, well, Miles is a genius regardless of what he does, because he's reinvented jazz so many different times, so he must have done it again. And then the other stuff he did later in the 70s too. Like, I think candidly, I think Miles is on his downward swing here, and people aren't necessarily seeing it, but by the time, you know, I mean, really, in a few years, he's kind of out of the game. Right. So anyway, so that's I'm sure there are people watching.
Controversial statement.
Total heresy, but I just got to speak my truth on this. So
yeah, but I agree to a certain point. Definitely, I think it's an iconic record. But I would rather recommend In a Silent Way, Jack Johnson, and On the Corner than this. If you want those sort of what this gives you, but in sort of simpler terms, or a little bit, I wouldn't say it's wrong for me to say easy to get into, but I just better records, like really better records, and I love On the Corner. But
like, does this actually have to be a double album, right? Are there enough ideas on this record to merit two records worth of it? Surely to God, one LP was sufficient, right? To, you know, to convey. I think he achieves more on In the Silent Way than he achieves here in like two or three tracks, right? So,
and if you look at his live stuff from this time period, like Live Evil, or I don't know if Black, what's it called? Fuck it. It's all long jams. Like, I think that he could, if he wanted to do that, he could just leave it to the concerts, really, and not the studio material. But controversial statements, and I love it, and I love that we agree.
Well, there you go. Well, anyway, but you know, I'm not throwing it away anytime soon. So, okay, the last record we're going to talk about is, again, a bit of a change of pace, and that's Vanilla Fudge's debut, with the phenomenal cover on it, with this sort of whatever it is, negative image of the woman there. And anyway, we're just I think a classic 60s cover, and then very, very classic 60s band images as well, which makes me chuckle. So this record, this is Vanilla Fudge's debut from what, 67, I think. It's a very 1967 record in a lot of ways, in that it's, you know, so much happened so fast in the development of rock music in the 60s. And people are getting away from the, you know, the Moon, June Spoon, Baby I Love You stuff, from Buddy Holly to the Beatles to the early Stones. Like, that's a thing. Then Rubber Soul and Revolver come along, and then everybody's realized, and the Byrds, and people, okay, no, everything's changing, right? So one of the things that's interesting about this record is that at a time when writing your own music, right, was suddenly the thing, and being, you know, like Dylan and the Beatles, and being an artist that wrote your own songs. This is an album of covers, right, start to finish. It's I don't think they wrote any of these tunes, except for there's 2 or 3 little kind of instrumental bits which last like 20-30 seconds or whatever, which you know, they wrote. But the rest of these are all, they take a song and they slow it down, right, to great effect, right? So it's interesting they're not writing their own tunes. I think you can trace the beginnings of stoner music, like if you think of like the stoner heavy metal of Sabbath and so on. Like, think of Master of Reality. In some respects, Master of Reality owes a debt to this record, the concept of just playing things slower and being committed to doing that. Deep Purple, like the heavy organ sound here, like I think they're on the record as saying, you know, yeah, like we love the sound that Vanilla Fudge had. Although, but again, it's still a pretty limited band. It always makes me laugh with these guys. Like Zeppelin's first tour of North America was actually supporting these guys. And there's like a famous concert poster you can see where it's like Vanilla Fudge with Len Zeppelin, right? Like it's anyway, which is, you can find that on the internet somewhere. It's pretty funny. Yeah. So and so what their shtick, you know, had sort of limited lifespan because it's only small. You can just cover other people's tunes, and the big hits here too. But no, saying all those limitations. And in fact, I would love to hear more guitar and less organ in the mix, right? And make it actually heavier. That's what I mean. It's transitional. People hadn't, until I would argue Jimmy Page, late 68, recording the first Zeppelin record, nobody had really figured out, and I include Hendrix in this, how to make a really great heavy rock record, how to make it sound like really heavy rock. And clearly whoever was producing this, Shadow Morton, apparently, I never heard of Shadow Morton, but anyway, Shadow Morton did not get a truly heavy sound. And it'd be interesting to see what a band like this would sound like with the people that produce Purple or Sabbath, like what, you know, with Eddie Kramer, like what kind of a sound they could get out of a band like this.
Yeah, I totally agree. And this is also one of those iconic records that is on all the lists. I feel like it's I discovered this very late in the game, so I haven't listened to it that much, and the band that much. And I think that's the only record that I have with Vanilla Fudge also. But yeah, iconic, great record. I don't know what to. I think you said what was needed to be said.
Well, I'm sure there's more, but it's anyway. And I just got to say, I just once again, just the hair. This was like, this band belongs in the All Haircut Hall of Fame. I will say as well, being someone with very little hair myself, I'm
fantastic. And the Atco label is great, I think, also, and in terms of like layout and it's a beautiful label.
Well, you know what? So Atco too, it's interesting, right? Because so the Erdigans had Atlantic Records, right? Yeah. But Atco was their subsidiary label, right? Okay. To put their rock acts on, because their rock acts were not as, only their truly classy acts would they put on the main Atlantic. So Aretha got to be in Atlantic, but these guys, AC/DC and others, are on Atco. And in fact, sorry, more Zeppelin stuff here, but Jimmy Page insisted when they got signed to Atlantic that they had to be on Atlantic Records, not on Atco Records, which is where they would normally have been put. Yeah, so Atco, I always find Atco amusing just for, you know, for that. But a lot of great artists. A lot of great artists.
They're from Springfield, isn't they on Atco?
Yeah, they may well be. Yeah, exactly. But again, there was this kind of class divide between the jazz stuff, right, and the rock stuff that which anyway, I mean, again, that's the extent of my knowledge. I haven't read much more about it than that. But so there we are. There's our 10 records. Yeah. Well, I don't know about you. I thought this was kind of fun.
Yeah, really fun. Really fun. So yeah, great. And it's a fun way of interacting also and coming together with this sort of record. I mean, I can't talk for you, but I mean, I have my sort of frame of how I do videos, and this felt a lot freer in one way.
Yeah. Well, it's important. Yeah, it's important to get out of our cubby holes now and then and figure out doing different things. Anyway, obviously, for those of us who stayed with us so far in this video, we'd love to hear what you think about these records, as we mentioned. And please do, if you haven't subscribed to Jonas, it's SublimMedia, and the link is in the description below. And I'm, of course, Alan from 10-Minute Record Reviews. And yeah, we'll do this again soon. Thanks very much for taking the time, Jonas.
Thank you.
Take care.